I didn't go camping often, not because I didn't like the outdoors, but because something about sleeping in a nylon tent surrounded by nothing but trees and shadows always felt vulnerable. But my buddy Tyler wasn't taking no for an answer. He was the type who thrived off-grid. No cell service, no lights, just him and the wilderness. "You're gonna love it, man," he said, slapping me on the back as we loaded the truck. Clear skies, no distractions, and the perfect campsite. "Where exactly are we going again?" I asked, tightening the straps on my sleeping bag. He hesitated just a little too long. "It's this spot my uncle told me about, deep in Wolf Creek woods, practically untouched. That should have been my first red flag. I didn't know much about Wolf Creek, except it wasn't a place people frequented anymore. Something about strange disappearances back in the 90s. But Tyler always had a way of brushing off urban legends, and I wasn't about to back out now. By the time we hit the trailhead, it was already late afternoon. The trees loomed tall and tangled, their bare winter branches twisting together like claws against the pale gray sky. Tyler was in his element, bounding ahead with the confidence of someone who'd done this a dozen times. I, on the other hand, was already regretting every step. After an hour of hiking, we found the spot, a small clearing surrounded by dense pines, with a rocky overhang on one side. It was secluded, almost too secluded. Tyler set up his tent near the trees while I chose the open space near the fire pit. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I tried to shake the nagging feeling in my gut. That night, the fire crackled low as we swapped stories and drank a few beers. The woods were eerily silent. No crickets, no owls, just the occasional snap of a twig in the distance. "You hear that?" I asked, freezing mid-sip. Tyler shrugged. "Probably a deer." "Relax, dude." But it didn't feel like a deer. It felt heavier, like something big was circling us, just out of sight. I laughed it off and tried to match Tyler's carefree attitude, but the feeling of being watched stuck with me. We turned in around midnight. Tyler snored almost immediately, but I couldn't sleep. I lay there staring at the thin fabric of my tent, every sound amplified in the dark. Then came the footsteps, slow, deliberate, and way too close to our campsite. I sat up, holding my breath. "Tyler?" I whispered, but his snores didn't skip a beat. The footsteps stopped right outside my tent. I could see the faint outline of something standing there. Person? An animal? My hand crept to the pocket knife I'd stashed in my bag. The shadow lingered for what felt like an eternity before moving toward Tyler's tent. "Tyler!" I hissed louder this time. Still no response. Gathering every ounce of courage, I unzipped my tent just enough to peek out. The fire was almost dead, but its embers cast a faint glow. That's when I saw it. It wasn't human. It was tall, impossibly tall, with elongated limbs and a face that looked like it had been stitched together from scraps of skin. Its eyes glowed faintly, like dying coals, and its head tilted unnaturally as it stared at Tyler's tent. I froze, too terrified to make a sound. The thing reached out with one spindly hand, brushing the fabric of Tyler's tent. And then Tyler screamed. It was the kind of scream that shatters every nerve in your body. Before I could even think, I grabbed my knife and burst out of my tent. "Tyler!" I shouted, my voice cracking. His tent was shaking violently, and I could see his silhouette thrashing inside. The creature whipped its head toward me, its mouth stretching into a grotesque grin. I don't remember deciding to run, but suddenly I was sprinting toward Tyler's tent, yelling like a lunatic. The thing let out this guttural screech, a sound that rattled my skull, and bolted into the trees faster than anything I've ever seen. I yanked Tyler's tent open to find him curled in a ball, his face pale and streaked with tears. "Dude, what happened?" I asked, dragging him out. He couldn't speak, just pointed toward the woods. His arm was covered in deep, bloody scratches. "We're leaving," I said, my voice trembling. "Now." We didn't bother packing up. We grabbed what we could and bolted down the trail, the beam of my flashlight barely cutting through the dark. The whole time, I felt it behind us, heard it, branches snapping, leaves crunching. It was following us, toying with us. When we finally reached the truck, I slammed the door shut and locked it, fumbling with the keys. The engine roared to life and I hit the gas without a second thought. Tyler didn't speak the entire drive back. It wasn't until we were miles away that he muttered. I saw its face. It wasn't just looking at me. It was inside my head. I glanced at him, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. We never talked about that night again, and I haven't been camping since. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear those footsteps outside my window. The drive home should have felt like relief, but it didn't. Every shadow on the side of the road felt too sharp, too alive, like it was watching. Tyler sat motionless in the passenger seat, his head against the window. His hand was still clutching the sleeve of his jacket where the scratches ran deep. I asked if he wanted to stop by the hospital, but he just shook his head. No, he whispered, barely audible. It doesn't matter. It didn't matter? That phrase stuck with me, turning in my head like an echo. What the hell had we just seen? My mind kept trying to rationalize it. A bear? Maybe? Some deformed animal? A trick of the light? But deep down, I knew none of that fit. When I finally dropped Tyler off at his apartment, he didn't even say goodbye. He just opened the door, got out, and shuffled inside like a ghost. I thought about texting him later, but I wasn't sure what to say. I figured I'd sleep it off, convince myself it was all just some crazy adrenaline-fueled nightmare. But sleep wasn't in the cards that night. Started around 2 a.m. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my head. The fire, the shadow outside my tent, that thing. I just started to doze off when I heard it. A scraping sound, faint but distinct, like nails dragging across metal. I shot up in bed, heart pounding. My apartment was on the second floor. No one should have been outside my window. But the sound came again, this time louder, like it was right outside. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The flashlight clicked on, and I pointed it toward the window. Nothing, just the pale glow of the streetlights filtering through the blinds. I told myself it was my imagination, that I was jumpy from what had happened earlier. But then I heard it again, closer this time. Scrape, scrape, scrape. I forced myself out of bed and walked to the window, my heart hammering so loudly I was sure whatever was out there could hear it. With one trembling hand, I pulled the blinds back just enough to peek outside. There was nothing. At least that's what I thought at first. But then I noticed something in the corner of the glass. A faint smudge, like a handprint. Long fingers, clawed at the tips, pressed against the pane. I stumbled back, tripping over the edge of my bed. The phone slipped from my grip and clattered to the floor, the flashlight beam spinning wildly across the room. I grabbed it and scrambled to my feet, but when I looked back at the window, the handprint was gone. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in the living room with every light on, clutching a kitchen knife like it was some kind of talisman. Nothing else happened, but that didn't make me feel any better. The next morning, I decided to call Tyler. His phone went straight to voicemail. I called again. Nothing. After the third time, I decided to drive over to his place. When I got there, the first thing I noticed was that his truck was still parked out front. That struck me as odd. Tyler was always up early, running errands or going for a hike. I knocked on the door. No answer. Tyler, I called, pounding harder. The door creaked open. Unlocked. My stomach twisted. Tyler wasn't careless, especially not after what we'd been through. "Hey, man," I said, stepping inside. "It's me. You good?" The apartment was dark. The curtains were drawn, and there was a sour smell in the air, like something had spoiled. I stepped into the living room, my eyes adjusting to the dim light. That's when I saw it. The scratches. Deep, jagged gashes carved into the walls, the furniture, the floor. They were everywhere, crisscrossing like a madman had taken a knife to the entire place. "Tyler?" I called again, my voice cracking. I found him in the bedroom. He was sitting on the floor, his back against the wall, staring straight ahead. His face was pale, his eyes sunken. He didn't even blink when I entered the room. "Tyler, what the hell happened?" I asked, crouching in front of him. He finally looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes chilled me to the core. Fear. But not just fear, resignation. "They don't stop," he whispered. "What?" "They don't stop. Once they see you, they don't stop." I grabbed his shoulders, trying to shake some sense into him. "What are you talking about? What doesn't stop?" He just shook his head, his gaze drifting past me to the corner of the room. I turned to look, my breath catching in my throat. There, in the shadows, were the scratches. But this time, they weren't just on the walls. They were carved into the floor in a perfect circle, intricate and deliberate. Symbols I didn't recognize. "Tyler, what is this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. He shoved it into my hand, his fingers trembling. "Take it," he said. "You need to know what we brought back." Before I could ask what he meant, he stood up and walked past me, out of the room. I called after him, but he didn't stop. I heard the front door slam, and when I ran out to follow him, he was gone. I unfolded the paper with shaking hands. It wasn't much, a crude drawing of the creature we'd seen in the woods. But underneath it, in Tyler's shaky handwriting, were 3 words that made my blood run cold. "It knows you." I didn't see Tyler after that. I tried calling him, texting him, even going back to his apartment later that night, but it was empty. His truck was gone and the lights were out. I figured he'd taken off to clear his head or maybe get away from whatever was haunting us. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't coming back. Then the nightmares started. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the thing from the woods. Its 2 long limbs, the stitched-together face, those glowing ember-like eyes. But the worst part? It wasn't just watching me anymore. It was getting closer. Each dream, it loomed nearer, its jagged grin stretching wider. By the 3rd night, I could feel its breath on my neck. I started leaving all the lights on in my apartment, as if that could somehow keep the darkness, and whatever lived in it, at bay. But the dreams didn't stop. And then the weird stuff started happening while I was awake. It began small, lights flickering, appliances turning on and off. At first, I chalked it up to bad wiring. This was an old building, after all. But then I noticed the scratches. They started showing up in random places, on my kitchen counters, the bathroom mirror, even the floorboards under my bed. At first, they were small, just shallow grooves that could have been anything. But over the next few days, they got deeper, sharper, deliberate. I tried ignoring them, convincing myself it was nothing. But one morning, I woke up to find a message carved into my bedroom wall. "It knows you." I stared at the words for a long time, trying to convince myself I was dreaming. But I wasn't. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't even hold my phone steady as I snapped a picture. That's when I decided to leave. I packed a bag, grabbed my car keys, and got the hell out of there. I didn't have a plan, just drive until I felt safe. But no matter how far I went, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was following me. By the 3rd day, I was running on fumes. I checked into a cheap motel somewhere upstate, hoping to catch a few hours of sleep. The room was small and dingy, with peeling wallpaper and a faint smell of mildew, but at least it had locks on the doors. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. That Tyler was fine, that the scratches didn't mean anything, that the thing from the woods wasn't real. But deep down, I knew better. At some point, I must have drifted off because the next thing I knew, I was jolted awake by a loud bang. My heart leapt into my throat as I sat up, my eyes scanning the room. The door was still locked. The windows were closed. But something wasn't right. The air felt heavier, colder, like the room itself was holding its breath. And then I heard it, a scraping sound, faint at first but growing louder, closer. It was coming from the bathroom. I grabbed the lamp off the nightstand, holding it like a weapon as I crept toward the door. My pulse was pounding so loudly in my ears I could barely think. The scraping stopped just as I reached the bathroom, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence. I pushed the door open, my hands trembling. The bathroom was empty. The shower curtain was drawn, and for a split second, I thought about pulling it back. But something stopped me. I don't know how to explain it, but I could feel something on the other side of that curtain. something waiting, watching. My breath caught in my throat as I backed out of the bathroom, never taking my eyes off the curtain. I grabbed my bag and bolted out of the motel room, leaving the door wide open behind me. I didn't stop driving until the sun came up. By then, I was somewhere in the middle of nowhere, miles from any town or city. The paranoia had me on edge, jumping at every shadow, every sound. But for the first time in days, I felt a sliver of relief. Maybe I'd outrun it. Maybe it was all in my head. Then my phone buzzed. I nearly jumped out of my skin as I glanced at the screen. It was a message from an unknown number. No words, just a single image. A photo of my motel room. The bathroom door was open. The shower curtain was pulled back. And scrawled across the mirror, in long, jagged letters, were 3 words: "You can't run." I stared at the screen, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. The message shouldn't have been possible. There was no one else in that motel room, no one who could have taken that photo. But there it was. And those words, "You can't run." I tried to think rationally. Maybe someone followed me. Maybe it was Tyler. Maybe it was some twisted prank. But deep down, I knew none of that was true. It was still with me. I could feel it. Something heavy and dark pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I slammed the phone face down on the passenger seat and hit the gas. My car sped down the empty highway, the sun rising in my rearview mirror. I had no destination, no plan. I just drove, as if I could outrun the thing that had latched onto me. But by nightfall, the exhaustion caught up with me. My eyes were heavy, my body trembling from lack of sleep. I couldn't keep going like this. I needed to stop, if only for a few hours. I found a rest stop just off the highway, the kind of place that was more parking lot than anything else. A couple of vending machines, a single bathroom, and one dim light buzzing overhead. There was only one other car in the lot, its windows dark. I parked as far from it as I could, locking the doors before leaning back in my seat. I tried to stay awake, but my body was shutting down. The adrenaline that had kept me going was gone, leaving nothing but exhaustion. My eyes drifted shut against my will. I don't know how long I was out, but I woke to the sound of knocking. Tap, tap, tap. My eyes snapped open, my heart pounding. The windows were fogged from the cold, but I could make out the faint outline of a figure standing just outside the driver's side door. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. No answer, just more knocking, slow and deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. I grabbed my phone, using the screen's light to cut through the dark. I wiped at the fogged glass with my sleeve, dreading what I might see. Nothing. The knocking stopped. I glanced around, the dim light overhead casting long shadows across the empty lot. The other car was gone. And then I heard it. A faint, guttural growl, low and vibrating like it was coming from everywhere and nowhere all at once. My stomach dropped as I turned toward the back seat. There it was. Its face was pressed against the inside of the rear window, its stitched-together skin stretched into that same grotesque grin. Its glowing eyes locked onto mine as its long fingers scratched slowly across the glass. I screamed, fumbling with the keys. The car roared to life and I slammed on the gas, tearing out of the lot so fast the tires screeched. The figure didn't move. It just watched as I sped away. Its grin burned into my mind. I don't remember much of the drive after that. Everything was a blur of panic and adrenaline. I just kept going, mile after mile, until I couldn't keep my eyes open any longer. Eventually, I pulled off onto a dirt road leading deep into the woods. Felt reckless, but I didn't care anymore. I needed to hide. The road ended at a small clearing surrounded by towering pines. I parked the car and killed the engine, sitting in the dark with my hands gripping the steering wheel. The silence was deafening. I reached for my phone, intending to call someone, anyone, but it was dead. No signal, no battery. I was completely alone. That's when I saw it. The scratches. They were on the hood of my car, long and deep, like something had clawed at the metal. My breath hitched as I stumbled out, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The scratches weren't just random, they formed words. "It's too late." A twig snapped behind me. I spun around, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the trees. The shadows seemed to move, twisting and writhing just out of reach. My breath came in short, shallow gasps as I backed toward the car. Then I saw it. The figure emerged from the tree-line, its limbs bending at impossible angles as it moved toward me. The grin was wider now, splitting its face in half, and its glowing eyes bored into mine. I don't know what came over me. Maybe instinct, maybe desperation, but I bolted for the car. I barely made it inside before the thing lunged, slamming against the driver's side window with enough force to crack the glass. I screamed, fumbling to start the engine. The car roared to life, and I floored it, the tires kicking up dirt and leaves as I sped down the narrow road. The thing chased me. It moved like nothing I'd ever seen, bounding on all fours, its limbs contorting in unnatural ways. It was fast, faster than it should have been, but somehow I managed to keep ahead of it. The road curved sharply, and I took the turn too fast. The car skidded, tires losing traction, and for a moment, I thought I was going to crash. But then I saw it, the highway. I burst onto the pavement, the creature vanishing into the tree-line behind me. I didn't stop, didn't look back. I just drove, the first rays of sunlight breaking over the horizon. I haven't seen it since, but I know it's not over. Every night, I check the locks on my doors and windows. Every shadow feels too dark, too alive. And every so often, I wake up to the sound of scratching. It knows me. It's been 2 weeks since that night in the woods. 2 weeks since I saw it. The thing that crawled out of Wolf Creek and latched onto my life like a parasite. At least that's what I tell myself. That it's gone, that I left it behind. But deep down, I know better. The signs are still there. Little things at first. A flickering light, a creak in the floorboards, the feeling of being watched. But they've been getting worse. The scratching, for one, started faint, like nails tapping on glass. But now it's everywhere. Walls, windows, even the inside of my car when I'm driving. But the worst part? Tyler still hasn't turned up. A few days ago, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something told me I needed to. "Hello," I said, my voice shaky. For a moment, there was only static. Then, a voice. A low, distorted whisper, like it was being dragged through a shredder. "You can't hide." The line went dead. I sat there, staring at my phone, my heart racing. I didn't know what to do, who to call. The cops? What would I even tell them? That something from the woods was stalking me? I sound insane. Hell, I felt insane. That night, I decided to do something I hadn't dared since it all started. I went back to Tyler's apartment. The building was eerily quiet as I walked down the hallway. His door was still unlocked, just like before. I stepped inside, half expecting to see the same mess of scratches and chaos. But it was clean, spotless even. No scratches, no overturned furniture. It was like nothing had ever happened, like he'd never been there at all. "Tyler," I called out, even though I knew he wouldn't answer. I searched the place anyway, hoping for some kind of clue, something to tell me what had happened to him. That's when I found it. A notebook shoved under his mattress. The pages were filled with frantic scrawls, diagrams, and symbols I didn't recognize. But one page stood out. It was a map, a crude sketch of Wolf Creek Woods, with a single spot circled in red. Next to it, he'd written one word, origin. I should have left it alone. Every rational part of me screamed to walk away, to burn the notebook and pretend I never saw it. But I couldn't. If there was even a chance it held answers, I had to see for myself. The next morning, I packed a bag, flashlights, batteries, a knife, whatever I thought might help. I drove back to Wolf Creek, my stomach in knots the whole way. When I reached the trailhead, the place looked different than I remembered. The trees seemed taller, denser, their bare branches reaching toward the sky like skeletal hands. The air was colder, heavier, and the silence was oppressive. I followed the map, cutting through overgrown trails and wading through patches of mud. It felt like the forest was swallowing me whole, the trees closing in tighter with every step. And then I found it, the clearing. At first, it looked empty. just a patch of dead grass surrounded by trees. But as I stepped closer, I noticed the ground was marked with symbols, carved deep into the earth. They were the same as the ones in Tyler's notebook. In the center of the clearing stood a large, jagged rock, its surface slick with something dark and wet. My stomach churned as I realized it wasn't water. It was blood. The air grew colder as I approached the rock, my breath fogging in front of me. The silence was absolute, pressing against my ears like a physical weight. And then I heard it. A low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. I froze, my hand tightening around the knife in my bag. The growl grew louder, deeper, vibrating through the ground beneath my feet. The shadows around the clearing began to shift, twisting and writhing like they were alive. And then it stepped out of the trees. The thing from the woods. Taller, more twisted, its limbs bending at impossible angles. Its glowing eyes locked onto mine, and that grotesque grin spread across its face. "It knows you," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. The thing moved closer, its body jerking with every step. I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything but stand there frozen in place. But I couldn't. Its gaze held me like a puppet on strings. It stopped a few feet away, towering over me. I could feel its breath, cold and rancid, against my face. And then it spoke. "You brought me here." The voice was a low, guttural rasp, like rocks grinding together. It wasn't just in my ears. It was in my head, vibrating through my skull. "No," I choked out, shaking my head. You followed me." The grin widened, splitting its face in half. "You opened the door." I didn't understand what it meant, but I didn't have time to. The thing lunged, and instinct took over. I swung the knife blindly, the blade slicing through the air. Connected, but it didn't slow the thing down. If anything, it seemed amused. I ran. I don't know how I made it out of the woods. The thing was always just behind me, its guttural growls echoing through the trees. But somehow, I reached my car, threw myself inside, and sped off without looking back. That was 3 days ago. Now, I'm sitting in my apartment, every light on, the knife still clutched in my hand. I haven't slept, haven't eaten, can feel it watching me, waiting. The scratches have started appearing again, deeper this time. And last night, I woke to find 3 words carved into my bedroom wall. "It's your turn." I don't know how much longer I can hold on. But if you're reading this, consider it a warning. Don't go into Wolf Creek. Don't follow the map. And whatever you do, don't let it see you. It's been a week since I went back to Wolf Creek. A week since I stared into the eyes of that thing and barely made it out alive. I thought leaving the woods would free me, that I could lock my doors, keep the lights on, and push it back into the shadows. But I was wrong. It's not just following me anymore. It's inside my life. It's crawling into every corner, taking pieces of me, breaking me down bit by bit. I started seeing Tyler, not in person, but glimpses. Out of the corner of my eye, I'd spot him standing in my hallway, his face pale and gaunt, or I'd hear his voice, soft, shaky, whispering my name when I was alone. But when I turned to look or call out to him, he'd vanish. At first, I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Grief, guilt, exhaustion. It could have been any of those. But then, 3 nights ago, I found something that made my blood run cold. A photograph. It was tucked into my kitchen drawer, just sitting there on top of the silverware. A photo of me and Tyler, taken at the campsite. I don't remember taking it. I don't even remember either of us having a camera. But there it was. And behind us, blurred but unmistakable, was it. The figure stood just beyond the firelight, its face barely visible in the shadows. But those eyes, those glowing embers burned through the photo like they were staring straight at me. I dropped the picture, my hands trembling. When I looked again, it was gone. Just an empty space where it had been. The next night, the dreams came back. Only this time, they weren't dreams. I woke up to the sound of footsteps in my apartment. Slow, deliberate. My bedroom door was open just a crack, and I could see the faint flicker of movement in the hallway beyond. "Tyler," I whispered, even though I knew it wasn't him. The footsteps stopped. The air in the room felt heavy, like I was sinking into the mattress. I reached for the knife I kept under my pillow, my fingers curling around the hilt. The door creaked open. There was nothing there, just darkness, but I could feel it, the weight of its presence, pressing against my chest. "Get out," I said, my voice shaking. "You're not welcome here." The silence was deafening. Then, from the shadows, a whisper. "You invited me." I froze, my grip on the knife tightening. The voice wasn't Tyler's. It wasn't even human. It was low, guttural, like something ancient and primal. The darkness in the hallway seemed to shift, coalescing into a shape. Long limbs, twisting movements, and then the eyes, two glowing embers that burned like coals in the blackness. It stepped forward, its grin stretching impossibly wide. "It's your turn," it said, the words reverberating in my skull. I don't remember much of what happened next, just flashes, running through the apartment, slamming doors, throwing furniture in its path. But it didn't matter. It was always there, just behind me, no matter how fast I moved. I ended up in the bathroom, locking the door and pressing my back against it. My chest was heaving, my hands slick with sweat. The scratching started again, this time on the other side of the door. Long, deliberate strokes that made my skin crawl. Then it stopped. For a moment, there was silence. I thought maybe it was gone, that I was safe. But then I heard it. A whisper right behind me. "You can't hide." I turned, my heart in my throat. The mirror was fogged. The words it knows you scrawled across the glass in long, jagged strokes. And in the reflection, standing right behind me, was the figure. I screamed, spinning around with the knife, but the room was empty. I don't know how I'm still alive. Somehow I made it through the night, but I can't keep going like this. The scratches are everywhere now, covering every surface of my apartment. My phone rings at all hours, the voice on the other end always whispering the same thing. "It's your turn." I've stopped sleeping, stopped eating. I don't even leave the apartment anymore. Every shadow feels like it's watching me. Every creak of the floorboards sends my heart racing. I'm losing my grip, but I think I know what I have to do. I went back to Tyler's notebook this morning, flipping through the pages until I found the map again. That word, origin, is burned into my brain. Whatever this thing is, it started in Wolf Creek. And if I want to end it, I have to go back. I don't know if I'll make it out this time. Maybe that's the point. Maybe this thing doesn't let you go until it's finished with you. But I can't keep living like this. If it takes me, at least I'll know I tried. I'm writing this as a warning. If you find this, if you're reading my words, don't follow me. Don't go into Wolf Creek. And whatever you do, don't look into its eyes. I parked at the trailhead just before dusk, the same spot where Tyler and I had started all of this. My car's engine ticked softly as it cooled, the sound oddly loud in the suffocating silence of the woods. Felt like the forest itself was watching, waiting. I should have been afraid. I should have turned back. But the fear was gone, replaced by something colder. Resignation, maybe, or exhaustion. Either way, I didn't care anymore. I just wanted it to end. The knife in my backpack felt heavier than it should have. I brought a flashlight too, but I wasn't sure how much good it would do. Somehow, I knew that light wasn't going to save me this time. The hike to the clearing felt longer this time, the shadows stretching farther, the trees pressing in tighter. I didn't hear any birds, any rustling leaves, just the crunch of my boots on the trail. It was as if the forest was holding its breath. When I finally reached the clearing, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the world bathed in twilight. The jagged rock was still there, its surface slick and dark, as if the blood never dried. The symbols were sharper now, etched deeper into the earth, and the air around them seemed to hum with a low electric vibration. I stepped into the center of the clearing, my breath clouding in front of me even though the air wasn't cold. The silence was deafening. And then it came. The thing emerged from the tree lean, its limbs impossibly long, its movements jerky and unnatural. Its glowing eyes locked onto mine, And that grin, God, that grin, spread across its twisted face. "You came back," it said, its voice a low rasp that seemed to vibrate inside my skull. I didn't respond. My hand tightened around the hilt of the knife as I forced myself to meet its gaze. "You can't win," it said, taking a slow step closer. "You were mine the moment you saw me." "Maybe," I said, my voice shaking, "but if I'm going down, I'm taking you with me." The thing tilted its head, its grin widening. "You don't understand, do you? You think you're fighting me, but you brought me here. You opened the door." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Memories flashed through my mind. The campsite, the whispers, Tyler's notebook, the symbols. "What door?" I demanded, taking a step back. It laughed, a deep, guttural sound that made my skin crawl. "You're just like the others, always asking the wrong questions, always too late." It moved closer, faster this time, and I stumbled backward, the knife slipping from my grip. The thing loomed over me, its shadow swallowing the clearing, its eyes burning like coals. "You're not here to stop me," it said. "You're here to become me." Before I could react, it lunged, its hand, cold and impossibly strong, wrapped around my throat, lifting me off the ground. My vision blurred, the edges darkening as I struggled to breathe. But then something shifted. The symbols carved into the ground began to glow, faint at first, then brighter and brighter until the entire clearing was bathed in an eerie, otherworldly light. The thing froze, its grip on me loosening as it turned toward the glowing symbols. "What have you done?" it snarled, its voice laced with something I hadn't heard before, fear. I didn't know what was happening, but I didn't waste the chance. I grabbed the knife from the ground and slashed at the thing's arm. It recoiled, letting out a deafening screech that shook the trees. The symbols pulsed, the light growing so intense I had to shield my eyes. The thing writhed, its limbs contorting as it was pulled toward the center of the clearing. "No!" it roared, its voice a mix of rage and desperation. "You don't know what you're doing." But I didn't care. I didn't stop. I slashed at it again and again, driving it back into the glowing circle. The air around me felt heavy, electric, like the forest itself was alive and angry. The thing let out one final, ear-splitting scream as the light consumed it, its body collapsing in on itself until it was nothing but shadows and smoke. The glow of the symbols faded, and the clearing fell silent once more. I don't remember how I got out of the woods. The next thing I knew, I was back in my car, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. The forest behind me was dark, still, and empty. But it wasn't over. I could feel it. The thing was gone, but something else had taken its place. A weight, presence. When I got home, I found Tyler's notebook in my backpack, even though I'd left it behind. The map was gone, the pages blank except for one. In the center of the page was a single symbol, and beneath it, in Tyler's handwriting, were 3 words. "It's not over. I haven't slept since. The scratches are back, appearing on my walls, my floors, my mirrors. And last night, I woke to find something new carved into my bedroom door. You are the door." I don't know what that means, but I think I'm starting to understand. It didn't just want me to see it. It wanted me to become it. And now, I don't think I can stop it. If you're reading this, don't come looking for me. Don't try to find Wolf Creek. And whatever you do, don't let it see you.